We're back with Troy Senik. He is from California, Scott Hodge, and Josh Barrow. Now, how to fix this? First of all, can the states just reset? Is there any way for them just to say, guys, I'm sorry, we just can't honor these pensions, we can't do these things anymore, we were on the wrong path, we got to reset? Is there any way to do that?
Well, if they take the approach that General Motors and others are doing, yes. They essentially have to go into receivership and call a halt to everything and say, we're going to go back to square one.
But wait, General Motors
got a bailout.
Got the bailout.
I know.
Got the bailout.
But it also put them in a position of having to renegotiate employee contracts and supplier contracts and so forth. So it did allow them that flexibility. And, aside from the fact that we all subsidize that effort, California can do it. And it has to do it quickly because it is beginning to lose population, as Troy mentioned earlier, to other states. Over the last 5 years, California has lost nearly 300,000 taxpayers and their families to other states throughout migration. And they took with them $26 billion in income out of the state. Now that means that the California economy is going to be starting to shrink, and their tax base is shrinking too. And that means they're going to constantly face this never-ending spiral of trying to tax a shrinking pool of income with higher and higher taxes.
Where'd they go? Where'd the people go when they left? Do you know?
The rest of the country.
Mountain West states, Florida.
What happened in
Nevada, Arizona, elsewhere?
Anybody tell me what happened in Maryland? Because I think there's some real lessons to be learned here. In the positive, I mean, they were negative lessons, but what happened in Maryland?
The Comptroller General reported last year in Maryland that the number of households over 1 million fell by a third, and that brought down the total amount of income tax collected from millionaires by $100 million. So when they passed a millionaires tax, they saw the number of millionaires decline by a third and the amount of revenue collected from them by $100 million. That's pretty severe.
If I'm a progressive, I just say we need a millionaires tax nationwide, because that way nobody could move anywhere. You know what I mean?
They'll still move to Florida.
Well, that's the effort that the public employee unions are making. They're making a very concerted effort in Washington and with their affiliated groups in the states to push millionaires' taxes at the state level, and they've had some success during the recession. As we noted, Oregon just passed one by referendum last week. I believe it's about a dozen states that have enacted or raised their millionaires' taxes since the start of the recession. And politically, it's a popular idea right now. A lot of people are saying, yeah, let's make the rich people pay more. There hasn't been a lot of focus on what the long-term economic effects are.
Real quick, these are the failing states. California, that debt is staggering. $541 billion. Rhode Island, little teeny state. I mean, you can walk that state in a day. $8 billion. Michigan, 29. Oregon, 11 billion. Which are these the closest to collapse? Which are the closest to collapse?
I don't think any of these states need to collapse. Ultimately, what you need to do to fix these problems is simple. You need to spend less money. California needs to figure out why it costs them twice the national average to imprison a prisoner. I mean, you're laughing, but...
Guys, I'm laughing because what planet are you living on? All they have to do is just decide to spend less money. Any of these states look like the kind of states that are going to spend less money? That's not what they... But they have a different philosophy. But they laugh at me when... They laugh at you when you say, spend less.
But sometimes your philosophy runs into reality. I mean, if California is really faced with the prospect of bankruptcy, which is a huge problem for the state. I mean, New York City almost went there in the 1970s and went under federal financial receivership. It's not something the state wants to do. They basically have to give up control over running the state to the federal government. And so, do you really think that federal... Yeah, it's not an appealing option. So I think that when states really realize that you can't keep spending more and more and more when you don't have the money to spend it, they'll have to get spending under control.
Okay. I want you guys, and Troy, help us out on this. When we come back, I want to ask each of you guys for a state or a policy that you say the federal government should be looking at this right now. We should do this on the federal side, and also all states should look at this, either policy or state, and say, do this. We'll come back in just a second. We're back with Troy Senik in California, Scott Hodge, Josh Barrow, and we're talking about the progressive states versus the common sense states. Who's failing, who's not, what can we learn from it? We've focused a lot on California. Next week I'm going to be out in California. We've got a lot coming up for you, including some of the problems and some of the things that you need to know because I think this federal government is coming after California. I think they're going to bail them out. Our guests don't. I do. I'm not so optimistic. But also the things that we can learn from California, if you're doing them in your state, don't do them anymore. Let me come back here now, and Troy, let me start with you. If you could get America to listen to one idea, one policy, or look at one state and say, you got to do this, so you don't fall into the California trap, what would it be?
I think Texas is the model. I think the nation, especially state governments around the nation, should be looking at Texas. I mean, when you look at how their government is composed and how fundamentally different it is from a state like California. I mean, they have a part-time legislature that meets once every 2 years because it's in their constitution that otherwise it's a threat to the liberties of the citizens of Texas.
Which is what our founders wanted. Our founders wanted that in the federal government.
They have a Sunset Commission that's dedicated to terminating wasteful and duplicative government agencies. Texas should be the model if you want to build a state to succeed in the long term. California is the model for failure.
Okay, Scott.
I would enact a taxpayer bill of rights, which Colorado has used for over 20 years to control the growth of government and spending and taxes. And I think that Washington needs a spending control mechanism. Obviously, spending is out of control, and tax revenues are not really the problem. It's really spending. Until we get spending under control, all the tax increases in the world will not solve the problem.
Yeah, but they froze our spending.
You have to free all spending, not just a small.
Really? Not 17%? Not 17%? All of it?
No, it has to be all of it.
That's quite a concept. Josh.
I would get public sector employee pay under control. Payroll is a huge part of government costs, especially at the local government level. And during the recession, public employee wages and benefits have kept rising as though there weren't a recession at all. Since 2007, public employee pay is up 3% more than private sector pay.
But that's got to be, I mean, let's look at this. Yeah. I'm trying to remember these numbers off the top of my head, but it's about 40-some thousand is the average pay for the average American. But if you work for the government, the average pay is $70,000.
Right.
I mean, and you're saying their increases, even that big spread, their increases are still 3% more.
They are, and also that's just looking at wages, but government employees do even better on a relative basis on non-wage benefits. They have much more generous health care plans, and that's all very expensive for taxpayers. So partly that just involves fiscal discipline by state legislators, and then also in a lot of states you have binding arbitration laws that strip legislators of the power even to control public employee pay if they wanted to. We've seen that here in New York and in other places. You have arbitrators who aren't accountable to anybody handing out big raises to public employees that nobody has any power to undo. So that's something that if you get that under control, you can start getting the cost of government under control.
I just saw this week that we have the federal government now employs more people than ever before. I mean, we're talking about the states, but the federal government is going down exactly the same path as California. We're going down the same rabbit hole. And all I can think of is what Alice, she looked at the little mint, it said, eat me. And I just, eat me. I mean, jeez, for the love of Pete. Okay, gentlemen, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Thank you, Glenn.
Next week, like I said, we are going to be out in California, and we have several things. We have Ben Sherwood, I'm trying to convince to be with me. He's a guy who wrote the book, The Survivors Club, which is Think the Unthinkable. We were just talking in the commercial break. I can't take it anymore. I can't take, if one more person says, oh, gee, you know, we're the United States, we'll never fail. What? What do we have, some magic pixie dust that shoots out of our butt from time to time? We don't bend the laws of economics or physics. We're Americans. We can fix things, but we have to be honest about it. So we're going to talk about the Survivors Club, and also we may talk to some of the radicals out in California. Oh, yeah. Some of the progressive radicals and some of the Tea Party radicals. Hear from both sides. See if you can figure out which is the right direction to go for California. That's all next week, live from California, and then in Pasadena on the 13th with Bill O'Reilly. That's next Saturday. Look for tickets at glennbeck.com. Back in just a second.
Next week, Surf's Up.
I'm coming for you, California.
Glenn Beck goes Hollywood. His mission, get tan. Wait, actually just get less pale. Will the land of the uber liberals be ready for Beck? Unsustainable debt, unbelievable taxes, unacceptable lawmakers.
California, you're surrounded by crazy people. What I'd like to know
is if the union has the right to kick out states. Because if so, I'd like to take a star right out of our flag, and California is the first to go on my list.
Tune in next week when the Glenn Beck program switches coasts, and Glenn will try and find a few friendly faces in Hollywood. Penn Jillette, Craig T. Nelson, John Voight, and more. It all starts Monday, February 8th.
I will see you there.